Frantic barks echoed through the port terminal as Thor, a mixed-breed dog with an extraordinary sense of smell, stood fixed in front of the last container in row H13. His brown eyes, usually gentle, now revealed a disturbing intensity. What had that dog discovered that made him bark nonstop for over 2 hours? Michael De Vere watched his canine partner with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. In 2 years of working together, he had never seen Thor so determined. The scent dog, known for his accuracy in detecting irregularities, alternated between barks and deep growls as he scratched insistently at the metal door of the container. "Thor never misses," Michael murmured to himself. The dog, even more agitated, shifted his gaze between the container and a group of customs officers, 3 uniformed men who initially carried out their normal routine, now exhibited behavior that only Thor, with his animal instinct, had perceived as suspicious. They exchanged nervous glances and whispered conversations over the radio. Have you ever wondered how a simple dog rescued from the streets can become the key to unraveling one of the largest international crime schemes? The light rain falling over the port intensified the atmosphere of tension. The sun began to set, painting the sky with orange hues that contrasted with the elongated shadows of the giant cranes. Thor continued his tireless vigil, as if he knew that within that seemingly ordinary container lay a secret capable of shaking the foundations of the criminal underworld. As the port authorities approached slowly, Michael could not imagine that this scene would be just the beginning of an investigation that would reveal much more than simple smuggling. Before continuing, I want to ask you to just check if you are already subscribed to the channel. Here you will find moving stories that show the love and loyalty of dogs in a unique way. Don't miss it. On that rainy early evening at the dock, no one could imagine that the determined dog had his own story of overcoming adversity. Just over 2 years ago, Thor was struggling to survive during a devastating flood that hit the region. The turbulent waters swept him away for miles until he managed to cling to a piece of floating wood. That's when fate changed his story. Michael, who was assisting in the rescue of flood victims, spotted that small trembling body clinging to the wreckage. The puppy, despite being exhausted and scared, showed surprising courage by helping Michael locate a child trapped among the rubble of a house just minutes after his own rescue. Something about that dog caught the attention of the authorities present. Even without any prior training, Thor demonstrated an extraordinary ability to identify people and objects, guided by a sense of smell that seemed almost supernatural. His natural skills were too impressive to be ignored. It was then that Thor was selected for a special training program, the details of which remain confidential to this day. For 6 months, he completely disappeared, returning as one of the most exceptional scent dogs the unit had ever seen. What happened during that time? Who was his mysterious trainer? The transformation of the little street dog into a highly specialized agent intrigued everyone. Thor developed a unique ability to detect not only illegal substances, but also to read patterns of human behavior that would go unnoticed even by the most experienced investigators. His sharp instincts and extraordinary intelligence made him an indispensable tool in the most complex investigations. But there was something more about Thor, something that went beyond the training he received. In his eyes, one could see an ancient wisdom, as if he held secrets that no one else knew. Michael often wondered about his partner's past before the flood. What experiences might have shaped such an exceptional dog? The only certainty was that Thor was not an ordinary dog. His mysterious story and unique abilities made him a key piece in a puzzle much larger than anyone could imagine. I noticed you haven't liked this video yet. This is very important so that YouTube continues to share our content with exciting dog stories. If you love dogs and are enjoying the story, leave a like. It's free. Thanks. Now, let's continue. Michael De Vere was not an ordinary investigator. At 38 years old, he had a record of solved cases that others considered impossible. His desk, always meticulously organized, hid drawers filled with files about crimes that seemed, at first glance, to have no connection to one another. For the past 8 months, a series of sophisticated thefts had been challenging the authorities. First, it was an ancient tiara belonging to a European royal family. Then, a rare set of Phoenician coins. Next, an invaluable medieval manuscript. The modus operandi was always the same. Perfect crimes executed with surgical precision that left no traces, only small details that only someone with Michael's trained eye could connect. Can you imagine what the pattern is that links these seemingly perfect crimes? In his home office, an entire wall was covered with photos, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. Red lines connected seemingly random events, forming a pattern that only he could decipher. Michael spent hours there, studying every detail, every movement of the criminals, every tiny clue left behind. What intrigued the investigator the most was the absence of violence in all the cases. The thieves seemed to simply glide into the safest places in the world, take exactly what they wanted, and disappear like ghosts. There were no break-ins, no witnesses, no digital evidence. Nothing but an emptiness in the spot where a valuable piece once was. Michael knew he was dealing with a highly sophisticated criminal organization. In his personal notes, he had written, "They don't just steal art, they steal history." It was as if each piece was selected not just for its monetary value, but for some greater significance that still eluded him. Thor's arrival in his life had changed everything. The dog brought a new perspective to the investigations, as if his extraordinary abilities were the missing piece in this complex criminal puzzle. Thor's incessant barking echoed through the dock on that busy morning. His eyes fixed on the last container in the south, row left no doubt. Something there had sparked his extraordinary interest. Michael watched his canine partner closely, trying to decipher what was causing such agitation. The suspicious movements of some customs officers around that specific container heightened the duo's curiosity even further. Thor, with his exceptionally trained nose, displayed a growing restlessness different from any behavior he had shown during their routine patrols around the port. As they discreetly circled the area, Thor didn't decrease the intensity of his barking. His specialized training, the result of a highly secret program, enabled him to detect situations that even the most experienced investigators might overlook. There was something about that container that only he could perceive. The port workers seemed nervous at the sight of the duo. One of them, in particular, frequently checked his phone and cast furtive glances toward the container. Michael mentally noted his face. Something in his movements suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Thor began to scratch insistently at a specific spot on the container. Michael knew he needed to act quickly, but also cautiously. A hasty action could compromise the discovery that his canine partner was desperately trying to communicate. The investigator noticed a crucial detail. The identification number of the container seemed ordinary at first glance, but something about it caught his attention. Consulting his notes on recent cases, Michael began to perceive patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. As they awaited the ideal moment to approach, Michael watched in fascination as Thor's determination shone through. The dog, rescued during a devastating flood, had transformed into an exceptional investigator. His sharp instincts and mysterious training allowed him to perceive details that were beyond human comprehension. The tension in the air was palpable. The suspicious workers began to move more restlessly, as if sensing that something was about to be uncovered. Thor held his position, his barking now more controlled but equally persistent. The mystery unfolding at the dock seemed much larger than anyone could imagine. What secret did that last container hold that could provoke such an intense reaction in Thor? Michael De Vere closely observed the details that were beginning to fit together. On his investigation board, each theft from the past few months revealed a sophisticated pattern executed by highly experienced criminals. The series of clever heists around the city was no mere coincidence. There was something larger being orchestrated in the shadows. Thor's persistent barking at the dock had opened a new perspective on the investigation. The dog's behavior that late afternoon sparked a disturbing suspicion in Michael. Could it be that the mysterious trainer who transformed Thor into an exceptional scent dog was connected to these events? The thought troubled him deeply. In his home, In front of the board that detailed each crime, Michael began to trace new connections. The highly specialized and secret training Thor received was not something common. Very few people would have the ability to develop such skills in a dog, and one of them could very well be the man waiting in France, the former bank robber who had vanished from police records. The suspicion grew in his mind. What if the true objective was not just the valuable artifacts? What if there was a larger plan at play, with Thor as the central piece? Michael kept these theories to himself, aware that he was in the midst of an elaborate chess game where each move needed to be meticulously calculated. The investigator began to analyze every detail of Thor's training under a new light. The dog's exceptional abilities, his unique detection skills, the mystery surrounding his trainer, all seemed to point in a direction that Michael feared to confirm. Was the man in France, the long-sought receiver, the same person who trained Thor? As he delved deeper into his silent investigation, Michael realized he was dealing with someone who had always managed to evade the authorities. A master manipulator who might be using the thefts as a smokescreen for his true objective, to reclaim Thor. But why? What secrets did the dog carry that made him so valuable? The discovery at the dock seemed to be just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Michael knew he needed to protect Thor while unraveling the true extent of this plot. The former bank robber, now an enigmatic collector, had left a trail so subtle that only Thor could sniff it out. What would happen when they finally uncovered what was inside that last container? What other revelations awaited Michael and Thor in this increasingly complex investigation? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in Michael De Vere's mind. Thor's behavior at the dock was no coincidence. The dog had detected something that only he, with his special training, could perceive. Analyzing his notes, Michael noticed a pattern in the timing. All significant events, including the incident at the dock, occurred precisely at 3:33. The first connection emerged when examining Thor's history. The dog's rescue during the flood was not an arbitrary event. The coordinates of the location where he was found matched an old meeting point used by an international gang that had been dismantled a decade ago. The same group that the mysterious man who later trained Thor had been a part of. In his office, Michael studied old photographs. One in particular caught his attention. A man partially visible in the background, watching a group of dogs being trained. The image, dated 5 years earlier, showed techniques identical to those Thor demonstrated. The trainer, known only as the Professor, was a legend in the criminal underworld, famous for training dogs for special operations. The investigator discovered that the Professor had mysteriously disappeared around the same time Thor appeared after the flood. Records indicated that his last known job involved training dogs to detect something specific, but the documents did not reveal exactly what that was. Thor carried that knowledge in his trained behavior. The series of thefts around the city appeared to be a smokescreen. The true objective was related to something that only Thor could identify. The dog was not simply sniffing out common evidence. He had been programmed to recognize something much more significant. But what? Michael realized that the Professor had left deliberate clues. The specific times, the chosen locations, even the way the crimes were executed, everything was part of a code that only Thor could fully decipher. It was as if the trainer wanted to be found, but only under the right circumstances. A new element emerged. Newly discovered documents suggested that the Professor had developed a revolutionary dog training method, something that piqued the interest of both criminal organizations and government agencies. Thor was possibly the only living specimen of this experimental training. Michael's suspicions intensified. Was the Professor using this elaborate sequence of events to reclaim Thor? Or was there something even deeper at play? The dog's persistent barking at the dock could be a programmed response, activated by some stimulus that only he could detect. What did Thor really know? And why was his former trainer willing to create this entire complex operation to reach him? Thor's barking intensified even more when the special team finally arrived at the scene. After hours of meticulous observation, Michael had called in reinforcements as soon as he confirmed his suspicions through the port security cameras. The container had been registered with false documentation. stepped back, ordered the operation commander as specialists positioned themselves to open the container with the proper equipment. Thor remained alert, his tense muscles indicating that something extraordinary was about to be revealed. The metallic creaking of the door echoed across the dock when they finally gained access to the interior. There, carefully packed among ordinary boxes, was the stolen Egyptian artifact from the historic mansion weeks earlier. The artifact, valued in the millions, was about to leave the country bound for France, where the collector, a former bank robber, awaited its arrival. The discovery confirmed Michael's suspicions. The mansion theft and the attempted smuggling were just part of a much larger scheme. The suspicious customs employees were detained for questioning, but Michael knew they were just pawns in a much more complex game. Thor finally calmed down, sitting beside his partner with that satisfied look of mission accomplished. However, something in the dog's behavior still intrigued Michael. Even after the discovery, Thor occasionally cast anxious glances at a specific spot in the container, as if there was something more there that only he could perceive. The investigator made a mental note to thoroughly examine that container later. If he knew his canine partner well, he understood that Thor rarely made mistakes, and when he demonstrated this particular restlessness, there were usually more layers of mystery to unravel. Michael, with his keen eye and years of investigative experience, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Egyptian artifact, so valuable and rare, had finally been recovered and was being sent to a museum. It seemed to close the chapter on a story of smuggling and international trafficking of artifacts. However, a new doubt began to hammer in his mind. Could the collector behind the theft be the same person he had pursued in his past, a former bank robber who had vanished from investigations years ago? The idea seemed absurd at first. The man he was looking for had been a master of disguise, a criminal who, after a series of audacious heists, had simply evaporated from the police radar. There were no more traces, and the years had passed, leaving only a faint memory of the criminal, who now seemed to have changed his life, or at least that's how it appeared. But Michael knew that things were not always what they seemed. He had a sharp intuition and a detailed memory of the small details that the rest of the investigation team tended to overlook. The collector's behavior, his buying methods, the tight circle of contacts, and especially the way he was so involved in acquiring valuable artifacts began to make sense when he compared that data with the patterns of action of the former bank robber. There was a connection that Michael couldn't dismiss. It was a clue as subtle as it was dangerous, but he knew that something bigger was at play. The investigator now found himself facing a dilemma. How could he prove that the collector and the former bank robber were the same person when all the evidence pointed in different directions? And more importantly, why would he be getting involved again with something as risky as the theft and smuggling of valuable pieces after having disappeared from police radar for so long? Meanwhile, the collector, while aware that the Egyptian artifact was on its way to the museum, continued his secretive dealings. He knew there was more behind that operation than just simple smuggling. His interests were deeper, with a secret network of contacts operating in the shadows, and he still held some important cards, waiting for the right moment to act. Michael, with his patience as an investigator, was determined to follow every lead, knowing that the truth was closer than ever. If the collector and the former bank robber were indeed the same person, Michael would have to act quickly before the man could disappear again into the shadows. Deep down, he knew this was not just a matter of capturing a criminal. It was about understanding the mind of someone who, for over a decade, had played a game too complex to be fully comprehended. Now, Michael knew he couldn't afford to make mistakes. The clock was ticking, and the collector, or rather the former bank robber, knew very well how to play with time and the minds of investigators. But Michael was determined to turn the tables. The future was about to reveal its next move. Thank you for watching this far. If you were moved by this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, and be part of our family that loves dog stories.